Madam Speaker, I thank you. I will restrict my comments to supporting the motion of amending the report in order to expand the scope of responsibilities. Madam Speaker, from the onset, at first when I was listening to Senior Counsel Orengo, I wasn't so sure whether to support or to oppose the amendment. Ordinarily, I would oppose anything that is an afterthought in terms of responsibility. But as I look at specifically the Gazette notice, Madam Speaker, which I want to refer to, I think that the people who ought to take responsibility on this matter extend further, even to the presidency. Madam Speaker, and I think I would be seeking direction, because I've looked at the recommendations which were made by the committee, which I believe they did a good job, the distinguished senators, and they went ahead and really interrogated this. And I'm sure my very good friend, Mr. Silas Rotich Rono from Kitale, Kiboet, who currently has over 20,000 bags of maize in his store, would be happy to see this issue of maize resolved. But Madam Speaker, going back to the issue of the recommendations, I had looked at the recommendations which were put here, and I was baffled. Because when I go back and I read at the Gazette notice, Madam Speaker, then I think that for the Minister of Treasury to issue this Gazette notice, he must have done so following certain laid out steps or conditions in which he is meant to issue that Gazette notice. Madam Speaker, reading the Gazette notice, I'm not sure whether this Gazette notice was issued or it was for notification. And I think people will have to tell us the difference. Maybe I wish the Vice Chair was here to notify me on the difference between issuing a Gazette notice and notifying the public. Because, Madam Speaker, if I can refer back to this particular Gazette notice, which we are now blaming for the flooding of our markets, it is not actually even under the Kenyans' laws per se. It is under the East African Community Customs Management Act of 2004. And Madam Speaker, if I can read the Gazette notice, and this act, to go specifically to the exemption part, it says it is notified for the general information of the public that in pursuit of powers conferred on the Cabinet Secretary under Section 114.2 of the East African Community Customs Management Act 2004, and in consequence of the declaration by the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Kenya Defense Forces of a national disaster through Executive Order 1 of 2017, duty shall not be charged for the importation of items set out in the schedule hereinto. Madam Speaker, on that schedule, maize is one of those items. So I'm completely baffled when I look at the recommendations that have been made by this committee, Ad-Hoc committee, that clearly say that the CS National Treasury should take responsibility. I think, Madam Speaker, it is important for us to look at the Gazette notice. Because in the same annexes of Gazette notices which has been issued by, which has been laid down on the table of this House by the committee, there is a similar Gazette notice, which is probably from, this one is from the Chief Justice, where it says, in exercise of the powers conferred by Section 10 of the Community Service Order Act. And this is specific to Kenya. So when I look at the Gazette notice, which was published under the directive of the CS Treasury, there was a consequence. There was an executive order. So I'm not sure who should take responsibility here. Should it be the President of the Republic of Kenya? And I don't know, Madam Speaker, you may want to give us direction on whether the committee should have actually called the president to go before that committee and ask the president, under what circumstances did you issue this executive order number 1 of 2017? Because CS Rotich proceeded by notifying the general public that, listen, there is an act, and this act is the East African Community Customs Management Act, that says that you can go ahead and open a window when there is a crisis. And in that time, the president of this Republic of Kenya, under Executive Order number 1 of 2017, went out and said, there's a crisis in Kenya. So with a crisis, we must solve the problem. So I'm not sure whether we should be blaming the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, who went ahead and issued and notified the public. Notified, not even issued under his own powers. He was looking at the Customs Act. And I'm sure, Madam Speaker, the vice chair or the co-chair of this ad hoc committee knows very well that the membership of the interministerial, particularly the ones who have to deal with this issue, who have to operationalize the East African Community Customs Management Act, are all the cabinet secretaries in the East African community. So when they sit there, they are guided by certain legislation. So in my view, Madam Speaker, I fully support the amendment of this report, but I want to ask a very simple question, which maybe might resolve to reconstitution of this committee, or maybe the expansion of the mandate of this committee, to ask, after the Speaker has given direction, whether the President could be called to also be able to say under what circumstances did the President issue the Executive Order number 1 of 2017. Madam Speaker, the issues to deal with here are broad. One of the things that concerns me is the laxity in implementing the rule of law at the border point. If the Cabinet Secretary notified the general public that people could import X amount of corn into this country because there was a shortage, or rather maize because there was a shortage, who allowed for the over-importation of maize, which the Cabinet Secretary had not authorized? That is a question which I want us to prosecute that matter after we've determined this issue of whether or not to pass the amendments. Because those are the people who should be held culpable. And if these amendments, which are calling for the Interministerial Committee of Food and Security to be included as people to take full responsibility, if they're the ones to give us an answer as to why Mr. Silas in Kitale right now is not able to sell his maize to anybody because of the flooding of this market. If they are the ones who are going to be able to respond to that as to why they allowed the over-importation, then by all means I will support this report. But when it comes to only holding the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury responsible, yet the Gazette notice is very clear under what circumstances that Gazette owners, the general public should be notified, then I think we'll be missing the point. Madam Speaker, we have a lot of crises in this country. We have a lot of issues that affect the farmers. I'll be remiss if I do not mention the issue of the sugarcane farmers. Right now in Narok County, Madam Speaker, there is a group who are protesting because the industry we have there, Transmara Sugar Company, has decided to drop down the price of sugarcane because this market is flooded and they can no longer compete with the illegal imported sugar. It is actually smuggled. Thank you. So these are issues that we must be able to really prosecute, carry out extensive due diligence, and those people who should carry the cross do so. Sometimes I get very disappointed, Madam Speaker, because we really go out and interrogate matters, take time to read, look at it. But at the end, we come back and throw everything that we've done. But this time around, I have to commend the committee. But I still wonder, why is it that it took you so long to realize that the responsibility was not with the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury? We need to look into that so that we can be able to be fair. You know, if something is wrong, say it is wrong. If it is good, say it is good. But the issue here is that these cartels, unless dealt with, and this committee has a perfect opportunity to be able to deal with this cartel, probably, to deal with them. And there are various issues that we are going to be able to discuss when it comes to now looking at the report. Because if you imported maize and you are only allowed, Madam Speaker, I have seen other Gazette notice which the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury has notified. Last year, we were dealing with the issue of wheat. And as a senator who comes from one of the big bread baskets of this nation, particularly when it comes to wheat production of Narok, I was concerned that if the millers do not scoop, and this time scoop is in a different way, or actually mop all the local wheat, then the wheat farmers will suffer. So the same, in that Gazette notice, it was very clear. It listed every single miller and told them you can only import a maximum of X amount. I would hope to believe that when we come to looking at the substantive issues on this report, then we'll be able to clearly see that miller A was told you can import up to X amount. For every amount of maize imported over the allowed threshold, I tell you, if I was a judge then, I would issue the maximum penalty. Because the amount of pain that our farmers have gone through in this country cannot be repaid by mere, you paying back to the Kenya revenue, the taxes. So, Madam Speaker, I fully support these amendments, and I hope that you will give us a way forward in terms of really looking at that Gazette notice, not even the extension. I'm looking at the initial one as who should be held fully responsible. Madam Speaker, with all these few remarks, I beg to support.
Yes.